What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2016 Volkswagen Jetta GLI Mark 6. Today on the Mark 6 behind me, we're going to be covering how to replace your rear wheel bearings. Now this DIY is going to be applicable to quite a few cars. We're going to make a little list over on the side. So if you want to pause your screen and see if your car fits under there, which it probably will, go ahead and take a second to pause that. But today we're going to be focusing on the Mark 6 platform. So Golf, Jetta, GTI, GLI. Those are going to be the core cars that we're going to be looking at today that are going to cover pretty much the same steps that we're going to be talking about now. And so for what it's worth, my good people, this DIY is applicable to front-wheel drive models only. So you have an all-wheel drive TT, that's not going to work for you. If you have an all-wheel drive Jetta wagon or a Tiguan, something of that sort, then the video is going to be a little bit different for that, which we'll be doing on another DIY. In front of us, we have a shuffler kit, which is available on fcpo.com and includes everything you see right in front of us at the moment. We have the wheel hub assemblies, we have our new locking bolts, and we have new dust covers. The only thing that we have added is a set of caliper carrier bracket hardware. For those of you that want to remove your whole caliper carrier bracket, maybe you want to paint something. If you're going to be removing those, the bolts are recommended to be replaced every time you take them off. So those are going to be linked in the description below as well. Typically, these are going to last you anywhere from 80 to 100,000 miles. The easiest way to figure out if a wheel bearing is going bad is simply listening to your car. As you drive it down the road, these units start to get a little bit noisy, the bearing wears out, and you kind of hear a warbling noise coming from the wheel. As it progressively gets worse, it's going to get louder, and in worst case scenarios, especially on vehicles that have a CV axle going to them, that is essentially all that ends up holding the wheel together. These are a little bit different because there is no drive going to the rear wheels on this car, so it's not going to be as bad, but essentially your wheel starts getting loose. So another thing you can do is simply jack up the corner of the vehicle that you suspect is bad. Feel for some play in the wheel, not play in a tie rod or a control arm bushing, just actual play in the wheel at the hub where it bolts to the vehicle, and that'll be a good telltale sign that your bearings are bad. Before we get started on this DIY, however, let's take a look at some of the tools you're going to need for this job. For this DIY, my good people, we're going to be using a couple different ratchets. We have both a 1/4 inch all the way to a 1/2 inch drive. Same thing with our torque wrench. We have a 13mm socket. We also have a 13mm wrench. It's a little bit tight to get some of the caliper guide pin bolts off, so we have both just in case. Something that's nice to have but not super necessary is a thin 15mm wrench. You can sub that out for a small set of pliers, something to counter hold the guide pins on the caliper. Small pick tool, this is really just to get the dust caps off of our wheels. If you have the factory tool in your trunk still, you can go ahead and use that. We have a small chisel, we have our BFH, we have a paint marker. Electric tools make the job a little bit easier. Since we're basically doing almost a brake job at this point as far as what's coming off and going back on, we have nothing more but my favorite, some ceramic paste from Liqui Moly, also available on the site. Sockets, again, we have a 17 for our lug bolts. The specialty socket today is going to be this bad boy right here. This is an M18 triple square. You're going to need this for the actual hub bolt. We have a 13mm socket, like we said, and we also have a T30 for the set screw on the brake disc. Outside of this, a normal floor jack and jacksons if you're working on the garage or in the driveway. Today we're going to be doing it on the lift just to give you a little bit better of a view, but this is definitely a driveway-friendly job. Now with that, my good people, let's go ahead and get started. All right, my good people, we are over on the passenger side of the Mark 6. These steps are going to be identical for both the driver and passenger side, so we're going to be using this one to focus on. We're going to start by removing our dust caps off of our lug bolts. I'm just using a small right angle pick to get these out. All right, then we have 5 17mm lug bolts to remove. If you're doing this at home without an impact gun, I highly recommend that you take your breaker bar first with your 17mm socket, break these lug bolts free while the vehicle is still on the ground so you're not fighting the wheel. Don't forget to take your parking brake off as well, and then you can lift it up and remove them the rest of the way. Today we're just going to use a Milwaukee to zap them out. And then this car is equipped with a spacer from 034, also available on the site. We're going to go ahead and set that to the side now. Next on our list, we're going to work on just making sure that the set screw is going to come off. If the set screw doesn't come off, then you're either going to drill it out or you're going to want to pause until you continue. No point in taking the car further apart. T30 for this. Shouldn't be that tight. You should be able to just break it free like so. There we go. We're gonna pull it off the rest of the way. Now we know that's gonna come off. We're gonna work on removing the caliper. We have two 13mm bolts to remove. The counterhold is a 15. For this, I'm gonna use the thin 15 once it starts spinning. So it's gonna reach in there and break the 13 free first with my wrench. Okay, now it's starting to spin. I'm gonna use the thin 15 to counterhold. Again, some small needle nose vice grips or pliers should do the trick here as well. If you're gonna be reusing this hardware, just be sure to put a little bit of Loctite on the threads. Some medium strength is fine once you go to put them back in. All right, with both of those out, now we can work the caliper off. Just be mindful your brake pads are swimming in here. They're gonna wanna kind of fall down as you pull this out. So be ready to grab those. Okay, brake pads are off. You can just let the caliper rest right on the caliper carrier, just like so. And then now that that's sitting there, we can go ahead and pull our brake disc off. If you need to, don't forget to grab your hammer, give it a couple taps, not on the contact side, of course, and break the disc free. There we go. And then we can just squeeze it out. No need to take the caliper carrier bracket off, which is a nice thing as far as the electronic parking brake is concerned. Makes it easier for that aspect of things. All right, with that, we have our old hub assembly here. This is a dust cap that's going to be coming off next, which is where we're going to use our small chisel. This one just happens to be a 3/8 strap chisel, but anything with a fine point, even a flathead screwdriver that you're not worried about hammering will work fine. You just want to find the lip between the hub and the cap. There we go. That gives us access to the M18 bolt that's inside of our hub. That's what's holding the hub assembly to the wheel carrier. We're gonna grab our breaker bar and our M18 and break that free first. You don't really wanna go at it with an impact gun. And to be quite honest, you're probably not gonna get very far if you try just going at it with an impact gun. So take your time, use your breaker bar. Let's go ahead and break this free. Once you get past the seal of the thread locker, then you can go ahead and swap out your breaker bar for your impact if you're using an impact, just to speed up the removal. And there we go. These are, of course, only one-time use and included with the kit, so please do not reuse it, as they are a torque to yield piece of hardware. Now we can take the old hub assembly off. It just slides off real nice. Make sure everything came off with it. No race or anything was left behind. Usually not a problem on these, but just something to keep an eye out for. We're gonna clean this area up a bit, and then we're gonna get ready to install our new hub assembly. All right, my good people, now we have our area cleaned up. We're gonna grab our new hub assembly. Make sure everything looks good before you feed it on. You don't want anything covering up your ABS ring here, making sure there's nothing attached to that, no dirt or grime. And then just feed it on gently. Just kind of work it on until it sits nice and flush. There you go. Once it's in, we can start threading in our new bolt. The new M18 already has the thread locker applied to it from our friends over at Scheffler. Now we have a few threads started. We're just going to snug it up gently using the impact. With that snugged up, we're going to go ahead and set our torque wrench to 200 Newton meters. This is going to be a two-step process. 200 Newton meters for the initial torque, then another 180 degrees. Make sure your M18 is all the way in. There's our 200. Now we need to do an additional 180. This torque wrench has a degree setting, so we're going to use that. However, for those of you without one, you would want to take your large breaker bar, paint pen or a Sharpie, something of that sort, mark the bolt in a spot that you can keep an easy eye on, and then just go ahead and follow the full 180 all the way around. There we go. All right, with our 180 done, now we can go ahead and put our dust cap on. These are always a little bit tricky to get on. They have some Teflon sealing on them to keep moisture out, so it kind of fights you. Get one side of it kind of started first, then grab your hammer and work it all the way around, nice and even as best as you can. The sound is going to change as it starts to bottom out. You'll know that it's good and ready to rock and roll. With that on, my good people, now is the time where I like to use the ceramic paste just to keep the brake disc from seizing onto the hub, especially as we live in New England, this car is going to see salt. So this will help it be a little bit easier next time the brakes get done. So I'm going to clean this up, get this ready to rock and roll, and then we'll pick it back up with the brake disc. I'm going to take our ceramic paste, coat where the disc is going to be sitting up against the hub assembly, and then just a little bit on the outside just to kind of keep it from oxidating so fast. Try to not get any on the threads for the lug bolts. The threads for the set screw, on the other hand, the torque spec is so low and those tend to get seized over time. So anything you can do to help them from being stuck in there and having to be drilled out, especially with a nice new hub assembly, is going to be the way to go. All right, now that we've Bob Ross this, we can grab our disc, feed that back over, line up our set screw hole right there. That looks nice. Same thing, I'm going to put a little bit on the seat of where the set screw goes so that it doesn't seize to the brake disc itself. Then we can take our T30 once more and our T30 screw, get those started by hand first. The torque spec for the T30 is only about 12 Newton meters as it's such a low torque value, and we don't really need it to be that tight. All right, that's nice, ready to rock. This is totally overkill, but I like to encapsulate them. Now we're just going to feed our pads back on. You can go ahead and use a little bit of brake paste on the ears where they ride on the calipers. These pads are probably going to be replaced next year at this rate. They still have quite a bit of life left, but they're more old than they are worn out, just from the little bit of driving that this car sees on a daily basis. So we're going to be recommending some fresh pads for next year, but we'll go ahead and give them a little bit of the liquid moly goodness. All right, pads are on. Make sure they're nice and snug. Get our guide pins pushed in. Make sure they're not going to be in our way as we feed this caliper back on. Now we're going to grab our two 13mm bolts. Again, we are going to be reusing them. A little bit of thread locker on them just to keep them nice and safe. And make sure you clean up the old stuff on them first before you put them back in. All right, with both 13 started, we're just going to go ahead and snug them up. The torque spec for the 13mm bolts are 35 Newton meters. Not a whole lot, so if you don't have a torque wrench handy in this size that can fit in here, just don't go too hard when you tighten them down. It really doesn't take a lot of force. With those nice and snugged up, my good people, all that we have left to do to wrap up this DIY is going to be to put our wheel back on and go for a test drive. So with that, we can take, for this specific car, our spacer once more, get that lined up. Then we're going to grab one of our 17mm lug bolts, get that ready to rock and roll, throw our wheel back on, lining up the holes for the lug bolts. With the car on the ground, we're going to torque the lug bolts to 120 Newton meters in a crisscross pattern. And with that, my good people, that is going to conclude this DIY for today. Overall, a really easy and straightforward job on the Mk6 platform, as well as the laundry list that we mentioned at the beginning of the video. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. Catch you in the next one.